Now, on to another story of Christian persecution. My good friend Aaron Edwards, I believe, is with me now. Aaron, good day. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thanks, Calvin. Good to be here.
So, give us the elevator pitch for those who are unfamiliar with your case. What happened to you in the beginning before we get to where we are right now?
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, I was. It was February 2023. I was a lecturer at an evangelical Bible college called Cliff College, affiliated with Methodism. And I decided to start speaking out more publicly on some of the issues of sexual ethics in our day, especially relating to the kind of intrusion of homosexuality in the church, same-sex blessings in the Anglican Church. The Methodist Church had already voted on gay marriage 2021. And I realized this is a really important issue to speak on. So I started tweeting about it, blogging, podcasting, etc. A couple of years into this, there was one particular tweet in February 2023 where I said homosexuality is invading the church. Evangelicals no longer see the severity of this because they're busy apologizing for their apparently barbaric homophobia, whether or not it's true. This is a gospel issue, by the way, because if sin is no longer sin, we no longer need a savior. That was the tweet that went viral.
And
Lots
I'm
of
sure you
people
had a
jumped
lot of
all over
support.
it.
I'm sure everyone agreed with you and you got encouraged because of that.
Oh, yes, absolutely. You'd think in an evangelical college, they'd be saying, well done, good and faithful servant. But sadly, immediately suspended, not allowed to talk to any staff or students, and fired 2.5 weeks later after a kind of kangaroo investigation by
So,
that was incredibly biased, which is astonishing, really. So yeah, it then brought a lot of support, actually, funnily enough, in my favor, when people realized what happened. But the
so
college
Cliff College,
thought they were protecting their own reputation.
they proved you right. But what I find funny about this is it's always image, isn't it? It's always optics. Of
Mm,
course, it's the reputation they're protecting. When
mm,
the whole job should be proclaiming the gospel. It's Christ they should be putting forward, not their own personal image. They're sinning straight away before they even get to a conversation of homosexuality or any other sin. Um,
mm, mm.
what's your relationship with being like with Cliff College up until now?
Since that, since the firing,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I haven't had any contact really with them other than seeing them, the leaders, in the tribunal, employment tribunal. I took them to end of May, early June. So that was the first time I saw them. There was some interaction online in between that, which I think you helpfully screenshotted something the Cliff College principal said, and then he deleted. So I was glad of your help in that regard, where he tried to sort of add some sort of suggest that there was some other reason I was fired other than the tweet, because I think they want to basically maintain, oh, we're evangelical, you can have conservative views and liberal views, we accept all of them as long as you're respectful and tolerant of everyone's views. And I said, well, that's not really possible. If the liberal decides that you're offending them or you're homophobic for saying something like I said, then you're not really tolerant of my view. And I'll show it's almost like I'm showing them that that's true. I tried to tell them that for 5 years behind the scenes, and they thought it wouldn't ever come to something like this, and it did. So yeah, the college then tried to backtrack and say, well, actually, or maybe almost insinuate he's a bit of a problem person anyway, and there's something else. And I think you helpfully screenshotted that before. I didn't even know it had happened, and then it was deleted very quickly. He
Because
insinuated that I'd been lying to the press and stuff like that, which
because
is
they're
amazing.
cowards. They're weaseling out. They're
Mm,
cowards. But
mm,
the problem is, you're right in that you can't have these plurality of views because the liberals will always say they're offended, so the conservatives are always the ones that are the bad guys. But also, you can't have a
mm.
plurality of truths. And if you're a Christian college, you should be teaching the truth as objective.
Mm,
There is
mm,
one
mm.
truth. His name is Jesus Christ, and we follow
Yes,
His way. And so, for a
yes,
college to say, well, actually, that some people think that and some people think that, then what are they teaching? It's worldly
yeah.
nonsense.
Yeah, exactly right. The funny thing is, you'll know this. I mean, and I'm sure your views will. Postmodernism is something which a philosophical system that aims towards the relativity of truth. So it doesn't really matter. It's your truth, my experience, my emotions, my feelings matter more than what is actually objectively true. Now, there has been a movement of postmodern theology in lots of colleges over the years. And it's almost seen as old hat. It's very 90s. People talked about postmodern theology, postmodern views. People kind of technically can say, I don't agree with postmodern theology because I believe there are such things that are true, because they know that it's indefensible. But ultimately, postmodernism has infected everything. So all of the higher education institutions, all the universities and Bible colleges included, because they're validated by that higher education system,
Yeah.
they're all seeing through a postmodern lens without realizing it. They will go to the feelings before the facts. They will decide what is the harm supposedly caused by someone who feels a certain way over what is actually true and whether someone's actually offended or anything like this. So I think this is a huge issue that it's become a lens that we see everything through rather than even something that we see. So no one goes on to saying I'm a card carrying postmodernist, but they basically are. They are because, and similarly, to Marxism, Marxism has affected so much about how people think, and they don't realize that. They don't think that they are Marxists, but they actually are.
No, I agree entirely. We've given up too much ground, and even people who think they're conservative have ceded ground to things like feminism,
Mm,
as an example, or the idea of egalitarianism,
mm,
moving away from complementarianism and
mm,
moving away from the truth on so many issues.
mm,
Once
mm,
we've the genie's out of the bottle, essentially, Aaron. How do we
mm,
get back
mm,
to critical thinking, first
mm,
principles? How do we get back to addressing the truth as objective without looking at it through a modern lens?
Yeah, and the answer is Christendom. Really, it's what we had. We literally wouldn't have universities without Christian theology, without and which is only possible because of Christendom. It was only the many, that whatever tradition you want to want to sort of cling to, we can all Protestants, Catholics, or Orthodox hold to the history of Christendom and say that God did some amazing things in and through the West. And the West is the way it is because of the Christians who fought and preserved manuscripts, who fought for the truth and set up institutions of learning where they could be sort of away from the fray in order to think properly and critically about these issues with this understanding that they understand the world as God's world. And I know that that's crazy, even maybe if some of your listeners may not all be Christians, may not all see that, but it's like it's hard to understand how different the secular mindset is to most people who've ever lived.
But
And we
this is
just
the
think this is
problem.
just normal. It's not. It's not at all. What we think now is just not at all normal for most
No.
human civilizations ever.
So the heteronormative has become normative. And that's an
Mm,
issue because that means everything around us is operating through this modern lens. Therefore,
mm,
you have no possible way of winning in a tribunal, as an example, because the people looking at
mm,
your case are saying, well, it doesn't matter if it's just that one tweet. It doesn't matter. He said homosexuality is invading the church. It's a fair position for them. It's reasonable for them to sack him over this one
mm,
biblical tweet. So how
mm,
do we're playing in their on their pitch by their
mm.
rules?
Yeah, exactly right. It's a strange one, really. People kept asking me, do you think you'll win? And I kind of like, well, I have been saying I was almost certain we would win on unfair dismissal. We had four charges, which were harassment, indirect discrimination, discrimination against my view, that is, and unfair dismissal. And the unfair dismissal was just really obvious. Like we had spent a week in court showing how the processes were just ridiculous. Like the guy who did the investigation on me, the impartial investigation, that morning, the morning after my tweet, he had said in the minutes of a meeting, I think Aaron is guilty of gross misconduct. He obviously did this on purpose to get the college in trouble.
Ah,
And I can prove that that's not the case. And the only public things I said about the college were, I thought Cliff College, what is a place where you can have contradictory views? That's what they told me. So
yeah,
I defended the college and hoped that they would defend me. And they actually did the opposite and denounced me publicly before they spoke to me. And then that guy is that same guy is carrying out this 2 week fact-finding investigation. He already thinks I'm guilty. There
yeah.
were loads of things about how they went about it which were wrong, but that didn't come to anything. So they still found in the college's favor. But I thought the other ones maybe that would be hard where the LGBT ideology might affect them. But it shows you just how much work there is to be done to reform the legal system. I know that anyone who loses a case could say that and say, "Oh, it must be that the system's rigged against me." But I think in this case, it should be quite ostensibly clear. The case we made was very strong and very clear. I was kind of shocked that the college didn't admit to any wrongdoing at any point when things were shown to them that they contradicted themselves on the stand so many times. It was almost like our barrister was having too much fun, our solicitor said at one time, just showing them the contradictions and they didn't know how to respond to it. And I just can't believe that the panel and judge couldn't have seen that and seen that there's some issues there. So it tells you that there's a lot to be done to, yeah, there's something else that's clouding judgment, I would say. It's almost like the fear of making a precedent in these kind of cases, because they probably, maybe they do think that speaking strongly against homosexuality is homophobic and therefore you're targeting gay people, which is not what anyone who's arguing about these issues is trying to do. We're trying to say, as you say, we're trying to say that heteronormativity is not something to be ashamed of. It's actually what normal civilization has been. And this is an imposed ideology that tries to say that you can't have normality anymore, or maybe the norm is the weird. That's the kind of way it's gone. So we do need to do a lot more to bring these cases up and to show people what is being missed in terms of justice and truth in these issues.
It does sometimes feel like you're the only sane person in a mad world, doesn't it? But
Yes.
everyone has a bias, everyone has a prejudice. We all understand this to be the truth. But we used to know what the bias was of the court, of the system. It was Christianity. It was we knew what were the things that were good and the things that were evil. We knew what was right and what was wrong because it was in a book, so we could all look it up.
Yeah.
But now that's shifted to this postmodern mentality that actually it's all about who is a minority, who's oppressed, and their feelings. That's superior to the facts, but also superior to what's morally good and morally bad. So morality has shifted, but not to a static place that we can look up because the goalpost depends on what the situation is. So there's no way to operate within those bounds, which means the whole system has fallen apart. Is now unfair because we don't recognize the bias, so we can't work towards the bias. So how do we? I mean, other than the answer is obviously Christendom, but what's a practical answer of how do we return? How do we fix this? Because our system's broken.
Absolutely, and I think this is the funny thing is, behind the judge, there's remnants of Christendom in all of our regalia, legal regalia. God and my right, in Latin, written in French, so written behind the judge's head as he's considering the case. Even the concept of justice, you think of where we came from as civilization in the West, barbarianism or paganism, and we've actually, you have to have a transcendent sort of point of justice. You have to have a sense that actually there is a God above all the kings, above all the rulers, all the authorities, in order to even make just judgments, and that means obeying what he's actually said as well. And so, as you say, biblical norms have been eroded in the West, and even in court. My favorite part of the trial was our barrister reading out passages of the Bible and saying, what if my client tweeted this? Would this bring the college into disrepute? This bit where it says women shouldn't exercise authority over men in the church.
Yeah.
What about that? And then the judge, who's an older judge, didn't know what these passages were. He hadn't heard them before. And then I said to the solicitor, how long ago would it have been in a British court that a judge just would have had to know the Bible? He said, only a generation ago. It would not only, so in one generation, it's gone from like, you basically have to know the Bible because obviously it's fundamental to how we understand morality, to take it or leave it. This judge knows a little bit, this judge doesn't know anything, and is completely disinterested in it. You just think this is just amazing. How can you possibly make just judgments when you don't have any sense of where the kind of fount of justice itself? So I think I'd say practically, fundamentally, those who do believe those scriptural norms that actually are the seedbed of the West need to believe them and speak them out. So we need to start proclaiming the gospel again fully and not be ashamed of it. So we need to be shamelessly biblical, and those who believe it. And then when we do that in all of our life, so it's not just going and telling you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. It's actually just speaking of the world as God's world and reclaiming that Christ is Lord, challenging those ideologies that oppose that. If we can get at least the Christians to stand up for Christianity, not to be so easily attacked the way we are in the Olympic ceremony we saw recently, for example. Yeah. If we can actually just have Christians who really believe it and stand on it, that will make a heck of a lot of difference to standing against some of these socio-political incursions on the Christian faith, which affects everyone. You've got people like you've been speaking to, Tommy Robinson and others, who I don't know if he's a Christian, but clearly has some sense of like, oh, I believe that there's some kind of Christian identity to the nation. People see that and they recognize, where do we get our values from? They're all saying Christianity. Are they willing to really believe it and go with it? And if they don't see Christians living it out, why should they? So we need to do that. We need to preach the gospel, live it out, and show others what the love of Christ can really do to not just individuals, but to entire societies and nations.
It's a good solution, Aaron. Thank you for that. I think also our judiciary is explicitly Christian. You mentioned our justice comes from the Christian faith, but also the judiciary itself. The King's Council sit there in the place of our king, who is a Christian king, and his whole premise is the divine right of kings, and that he is accountable to the King of Kings. It all comes from a Christian structure. So for a judge to be biblically illiterate should actually make them not fit for purpose. They should be sacked for that. But it's like saying, you can be a KC without passing the bar or something. It's just, you've got to have a certain level of literacy. So you lost the appeal. What's next for you?
tribunal, and we're going to go to appeal.
Are you going? Okay, so you've lost the tribunal on 4 accounts, and you're going to appeal on all four accounts, or
on all 4 accounts. It will be. I'm told. I mean, again, I'm new to this whole process, but I'm told it's just a day or 2. You go in court. Was the last one's a full week, and giving evidence. There's no more giving of evidence or testifying. It's sort of our legal team then challenging the particular judgments and the way they were made, and going over some of those arguments. Really, that's the kind of key.
Okay, so people can obviously pray for you as this date approaches. When is the date, and where can people find you?
Yeah, I don't know when the date is. It's probably in about a year's time.
Oh gosh.
They can find me on. I've been known to, to say things on Twitter, so they could find me on Twitter under Aaron_P_Edwards. I'm not quite as controversial as you yet, Calvin. I can only sit at your feet, I did appreciate you were one of the first people actually in Britain. I had a lot of Americans who came and helped me, but I think you were one of the first public people in Britain to come and support me in some of those comment feeds early on. Which was quite fun to observe and see. I think at a time when I had to sort of keep my mouth closed a bit after it all happened. I didn't know what was going to happen. So I had people like yourself bravely jumping into the fray and getting involved, which was a blessing. So Aaron_P_Edwards on Twitter. And I have a blog called That Good Fight. So thatgoodfight.substack.com. They can find me there too, where I write about all such things.
Yeah, do go and follow Aaron's Substack. And on that note of Twitter, I think that's something we can all do as Christian soldiers. We can all jump in those threads and support each other and support the scriptures and say, no, this is true because of X, Y, Z. Like this guy's not a bigot. He's not prejudiced against you because he hates you. He loves you. This is why he's preaching the truth. More of us can do that. And then it won't actually be controversial anymore. It will just be normal.
Amen.
I think that's the vast majority of this conversation has been, let's just normalize normal again. Let's do
Make
that.
normal again. Can we have a hat? Make normal again.
Aaron, you remain in my prayers. God bless you. Thank you for coming on and keep fighting the good fight.
God bless, brother. You too. Farewell.
That was Aaron Edwards, who's fighting the good fight, literally got sacked for tweeting from the scriptures, from tweeting from the Bible. Thank you for watching my Common Sense Crusade. If you'd like to watch the whole show, you can subscribe to lotuseaters.com for as little as £5 per month, and then you get access to a bank of content as well. My show is 3 p.m. every Thursday. See you there. Deus Vult.